Welcome, everybody. This is the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. It's Thursday, February 21st, 2019, and the time is 5:11 p.m. May we have roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Craig Naughty.
Here.
Commissioner Doom. He's running late. So.
Okay.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Shire.
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 2 on the agenda is the commission chair and vice chair. So we need a vote to determine the chair and vice chair who will serve the term of 1 calendar year per the commission rotation policy.
Well, for chair, I would like to nominate Laura Vartanian, and for vice chair, Commissioner Craig Naughty.
Ooh. Exciting. I'll accept the nomination. How about you?
I was hoping you might like to be chair this year.
Not this year. Maybe next year, though. I want to learn from one more grade. We had one
Very
here,
kind
one
of
here,
you.
and then the next.
I would
Okay.
support that.
Okay.
So we have a motion to nominate Commissioner Vartanian to be the chair for 2019 and Commissioner Cognati to be vice chair. Do we have a second?
Yes.
And, well, actually, I don't know. Well,
You can
can't.
second.
Yeah, I think
I
you're
can
allowed
second.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second.
I left my Robert's Rules of Order at home, so.
Just to be safe.
Okay, roll call.
Roll call. Commissioner Craig Naughty.
Yes.
Commissioner Doom is absent for right now. Commissioner Morgan.
Yes.
Chairperson Commissioner Shire.
Yes.
And Commissioner Vartanian.
Yes.
So we shall switch places.
Switch places,
Ooh.
name tags and all that. So.
Oh, these are yours.
You can leave it if you'd like.
And once again, a peaceful transition of
That's
power.
true.
Yeah,
We're so good.
indeed.
The speaker cards were right.
Oh, thank you.
She has
Oh,
them.
she has it
Or
already.
he has. Yeah, she has.
So I'd like to thank my colleagues for your confidence in me as your chair. I'd like
Yay.
to thank Commissioner Shire for your service for
Yes.
the
Yes,
past
for 2
year
years
and
in
a
a
half or
row.
2 years, I think.
That's
Thank
right.
you so much. So I'm happy to be able to give you a break, if nothing else. Okay, with that, let's move on to item number 3, which is the report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, February 18th, 2019, on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Number 4, we have approval of the minutes of December 6th, 2018. Any corrections, comments,
None for me.
additions?
None.
Okay. Do you have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
And roll call, please.
Okay. Commissioner Craig Naughty.
Because I was not here last month, I will abstain.
Okay. Commissioner Doom, he's absent. He will be returning. Commissioner Morgan.
Yes.
Chairperson Shire.
Yes.
And Lorna Vartanian.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, item number 5 is oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. We have 2 cards, and the first card is Arlene Fodor,
Welcome back.
former commissioner, former
Well,
historic
it's great to be
preservation.
back and see all of you. My name is Arlene Fodor. I am now an Arts and Culture Commissioner, and I look forward to the day, hopefully soon, when we can have maybe not a joint meeting, but at least have some communication between the 2 commissions. That would be wonderful. And I will mention that this year, I'm also president of the Brand Associates, the nonprofit arm of the Brand Library, and this is our 50th anniversary year. The group was formed when the new wing, the Performance and Gallery Wing by Jones and Walton Architects, was built in 1969. So that convened a nonprofit organization to support the activities that take place in that area. And we will be having a party, a big blast on October 4th. And of course, that's a long way away, but you're all invited. The original gala, which was done in 1969 by the Brand Associates, had a $5 ticket price attached to it. So we're going to request a $5 donation, but this is not going to be, this is going to be a public blast. It's not going to be an expensive ticket item. So it should be fun. It'll be a dress-up for the 60s event, and we're really looking forward to seeing you there because we're also celebrating that unique building. And in honor also, we are in the process of putting together a national landmark application, National Register of Historic Places application for the Brand Complex, and hopefully both the historic mansion and the addition will, I know the historic mansion probably qualifies, and I hope the addition does too. So the period of significance will be from 1903 to 1969. And a very interesting thing happened. I won't take too much more of your time. I visited Walton Architects, which still has its home in Glendale after all these years, and asked them if they had any historic photos or drawings to give me, and they did. They could not release them, but I now have authorization from the city to take those documents and get them digitized. And they were the original architect that converted El Miradero from a residence into a library. I did not know that. And there's a whole stack of really beautiful, detailed architectural renderings from 1955 when that was done. So we're going to take those, and we'll also take all the drawings from the Jones and Walton edition, and they had some interesting photographs too. So that was kind of a nice find, and of course we may ask Jay for some technical help with the scanning, but I won't put you on the spot right now, Mr. Platt. No. So anyway, I just wanted
TV.
to, especially on television. I wouldn't put you on the spot under any circumstances, especially not on TV. So anyway, just wanted to make you aware of that and wish you all the best and have a great historically preservationist year, doing all kinds of interesting things, and it's great to see you guys, as always.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene.
The update.
Yeah, thanks for stopping by.
Sounds like fun. I'm putting it on my calendar.
Maybe we should honor her.
Right.
No, Arlene, truly thank you for your continued efforts in historic preservation. I know you'll never stop doing that, and for all your efforts in continuing to landmark. We really appreciate that.
And it's one of the great things that Arlene is doing is following through on the city effort to nominate city-owned buildings for higher levels of designation, whether it's Glendale Register, or now this is the first time coming from the city that we're going to National Register. And I don't think Arlene intended to put any pressure on the seated commissioners to consider continuing in her tradition of doing this. I don't think that was her intention, but
Because she doesn't put people on the spot.
I just thought I would mention it. I would never put anyone on the spot.
She's done most of our
either.
assignments, quite frankly.
There are a few more out there.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Steve Hunt.
Yeah, I'm here to talk on item 9A.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my mistake. No, you didn't. That was just my oversight.
Right.
Bye, Arlene.
Bye. Have a good night. Okay, next item is number 6, comments from commissioners. Any updates or comments?
I have some.
Okay.
The first thing I would like to do is adjourn in the memory of Keith Palmer. Now, most people, he's been out of the city for quite a few years, but he worked for the city for almost 40 years as a planner. And I'd like to do just a little bit to familiarize who he was. He was born in Long Beach, California on February 8, 1931. In March of 1956, he got married and rented a duplex at 608 West Wilson Avenue in Glendale. In 1963, he got his first job as a his first job at Glendale City in November of that year as a parking meter collector at $250 a month. So that was a sizable amount of money. And was going to San Fernando Valley State College, where he got his 2 degrees. He graduated from there. He qualified for a planning assistant job with Glendale in November of 1963. He was promoted to associate planner in 1966. He was a planner in 1969 and senior planner in 1972. When he was with Glendale, he wrote several community plans and all of the general plan elements and was chairman of the South Glendale Plan Task Force and the 1990 Census Committee, so he goes back very far. And the way I met him was he used to do these slide presentations of the history of Glendale and buildings, and I went to one of them, and we became fast friends, though he was much older than I was. And he kind of got me interested in the history of Glendale more than I already was, and I'm sorry to see that he passed, and I would like to, he did a lot for Glendale, and I would just like to adjourn this meeting in his honor.
That's very nice.
Very nice.
Yeah, thank you for that.
My next thing, I have three ones here. Hooray, hooray. Today, well, this Sunday will be the 106th anniversary of the founding of Montrose by J. Frank Walters. It's going to be Sunday, February 24th. The Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley will have a booth at the Farmers Market. We'd like you to stop by and say hi and check out all the old photos. We have a whole bunch of new Montrose photos that we've just found. You can come ring the Glendale and Montrose trolley bell, see Montrose memorabilia, enjoy local history, and if you want, we have plenty of books on the Crescenta Valley and books on Glendale history. So if you'd like to, it's Sunday, February 24th, starting at 9 o'clock until the farmers market ends at 2 o'clock. So we'd like to see you all there.
Will the silver cup be there?
No, the silver cup is now enshrined at the library, at the Crescenta Valley Library, in its own with a light shining on
Wow.
it. It looks gorgeous. It's
Nice.
just, and there's a big picture of Montrose with nothing in front of it and the whole bit.
At the Crescenta Valley Library?
The Crescenta
On
Valley
Foothill? Oh,
Library on
nice.
Foothill, yeah.
Okay.
If you haven't been there, go see it, and then rub Toy Perina's nose. It's the big thing to do up there. There's a big emblem on it, and that's the lucky thing to rub her nose, so, on it. Last but not least, Glendale Beautiful is celebrating Arbor Day in Glendale. Arbor Day has always been a big thing in Glendale, and this Arbor Day 2019, at Tuesday, March 5th, they're having a coffee social from 10 a.m., and the program will start at 10:30 a.m. at Casa Adobe de San Rafael Park at 1330 Dorothy Drive, Glendale, California, 91202. Now, if it rains, they're going to have it at the Glendale Civic Auditorium. But if you've never been to Casa Adobe, this is the time to go. It's a really nice thing. It's in cooperation with the City of Glendale Community Service and Parks Department, and they cordially invite you to participate in our annual observance of Arbor Day. And if you want, you can actually contribute to purchase a tree. They cost $150 this year. They're 24-inch box-sized trees, but they can be named for somebody like Edie Good or anyone else that you happen to, one of your loved ones or somebody else. But Edie Good is very good for having a name for a tree. Anyway, if
Or
you
a
can,
commissioner?
or a commissioner, name for a commissioner, or Mr. Platt too. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know. So if you can get a chance,
When I'm
that's
dead, please.
yes, Tuesday, March 5th, 2019, at Casa Adobe de San Rafael Park. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next item is actually a strike, item number 7. I don't need to read that in, do I?
Nope, just error.
Okay. Number 8 is old business. Having none, we'll move to 9A, new business, review of proposed ordinance revisions relating to demolition, deterrence, and general clarifications and cleanups, GMC sections 2.76, 15.20, 15.22, and 30.25.
All right.
Turn to you.
So we could go on for hours on this. I don't think that we need to, but I want to remind the commission where we've come from, why we're doing this, and then how this process works, walk you through some of the big basic changes that we're making to various parts of the municipal code and why we're doing that, and then get your input, anything you think we've missed, anything you think isn't clear, any obvious errors, because this has been a group of us working on it. And the issue is, and I'm sure you all remember, that in last February, a house was demolished on Valley View Avenue illegally. It was a craftsman house, an early craftsman. It was architecturally intact. It was very interesting. When I first heard about the proposal, we were trying to work with the owner to find solutions, find alternatives to demolition. Some of those were subdividing the property in a way that would allow the house to remain where it was. We talked about moving the house on the very large lot that it's on so that it could be subdivided kind of up and down the middle in a more straightforward subdivision. We talked about moving the property, and we also talked about how he could legally proceed to move through the process to ask for permission to demolish the property. Many, many months of direct conversations with the owner led to an illegal weekend demolition. Didn't lead to, I shouldn't say, because we weren't part of that, but that's what was the result of that. And in reviewing the city's existing policies for how do we punish people who do this kind of work illegally, and how do we create a system of a policy that would be a serious deterrent for people to do this in the future, we realized that our existing ordinance language came up short. So at the direction of council, we brought a proposal to council to initiate this discussion that you're part of tonight. And the idea started out as, let's find some policies to really give us some very strong policies to deter demolition. And what that led to was us doing research, looking at local jurisdictions to see what does Pasadena do, what does Los Angeles do, South Pass, West Hollywood, Santa Monica, some of the major preservation-oriented cities in the immediate area. And I compiled kind of a lot of different ideas that they use. So no city did it in the same way as other cities, but there were certain through lines where we could see everyone's kind of doing one or two of these things. Some people had other ideas. And ultimately, I came up with a list of recommendations that we brought to City Council that I thought, as we presented them, would give us the strongest demolition deterrence policy anywhere in the region. And City Council, at the end of that hearing, directed us to move forward with drafting new ordinance language to achieve all of those goals. So I believe I updated you, and I didn't check what month that was, but sometime 4 or 5 months ago probably I updated you on this. But just to refresh our memories, we have a number of different ways that we can proceed if this were ever to happen again. And we want to make sure that people know about this so they know, hey, before you think of doing something like this, there are some serious ramifications. One of those would be that if there's an illegal demolition, we would prevent a permit being issued for any new work on that property for a period of 3 years. That's something other cities have called a scorched earth ordinance. And the idea is that you can't immediately demolish something, turn around, and start construction a few months later and reap whatever financial benefit you can from having done your illegal demolition. We debated back and forth, should it be 3 years, should it be 5 years? Because we were adding these other layers of either penalties or somewhat onerous things that could happen to property owners, we went to the 3-year, and that was our recommendation to council. And along with that, I'll skip ahead to one. We wanted to make sure if we're going to have a vacant lot in the city, we don't want it to turn into a weed-strewn nuisance for the neighbors. So we've created an affirmative maintenance recommendation so that the lot has to be maintained, the plantings have to be watered, it can't just be dirt, you can't park cars on it, you can't turn it into a swap meet, you can't do a lot of different things. So that would be a 3-year prohibition for development on the site. We also thought, well, a lot of people are tearing down buildings because, say, it's an 1,800 square foot house, but the zoning allows for a 3,700 square foot house. Well, you can make a lot more money selling that than the smaller house, and it also affects the neighborhood. It impacts how the neighborhood looks. So we created a provision that the new structure on the site would have to maintain the footprint, the height, and the square footage of the previous property. We went back and forth. Some of the other cities asked that the new building be a replica of the previous building. To my mind, that would be a very difficult thing in the 21st century to recreate an early 20th century craftsman house in a way that's meaningful. And I didn't recommend that we go there. Strangely, San Francisco just lost a Richard Neutra house, and that house is San Francisco's compelling the owners to rebuild that house exactly as it was. The difference is those drawings, detailed drawings for that Neutra exists, where we don't have drawings for any of our early properties for the most part. So we have that as a provision. We also wanted to consider, sometimes you don't have to tear down an entire building for it to lose its historic meaning. So we wanted to look at the idea of what we're calling partial demolition. If you remove character-defining features from the property, if you tore down a wing that was a significant part or took the roof off and put a different roof form on it, we wanted to kind of make this as broad as possible to accommodate different potential outcomes. So we want to include things that were done without permit and things that were done through direct demolition by neglect. The house on Valley View, the owner at some point in apparent good faith had got a permit to change the roof out. Well, that permit was used to remove the old roof, but never to put a new roof back on. So that's a clear example, one of the clearest examples I'm familiar with that we've seen here, certainly in Glendale, of demolition by neglect. So we wanted to take that into account. The previous ordinances only address Glendale registered designated properties. We didn't have a provision for historic district properties, and we didn't have a provision for properties that are either surveyed, that we're familiar with, but have no protection just because they're sitting in a survey, or for properties that we don't even know about. So we wanted to accommodate the range of potential properties. So we've included contributors in what we're now calling potential historic resources. And then through the city attorney's office, council directed us to increase the level of financial and civil and criminal penalty potential. And so the wording is in there for that. We don't say there's a certain fine or a certain penalty, and that's how the city attorneys wanted us to have this worded. But it gives us a lot more latitude. It's written so that we can use any or all of these. So depending on the situation, there could be some latitude. But the idea is, given that all of these are potential and it's written so all of them could be applied in an illegal demolition situation, we will, I believe, have the strongest kind of deterrent policy in the county that I'm familiar with, at least. Now, one of the things that happens when you open up the code is you realize, well, it's not just one chapter of the code that deals with this. So we have 4 code sections that relate to preservation: 2.76, 1520, 1522, and 3025. Those cover the duties of the Historic Preservation Commission. They cover the Historic Preservation chapter in general focuses on the Glendale Register and just general historic preservation policies. We had a separate chapter that dealt with demolition permits, which means permits legally obtained permits to demolish. Because even for Glendale Register properties, we have to have a provision in our ordinance to allow someone to have the right to ask to tear down a property, or in the event of a natural disaster, a fire at that property, we have to have the ability to remove something from the historic registry if it's gone and it's not done deliberately. So that section 1522 came into this, even though the illegal demolition deterrent policies aren't part of that, even though that's our chapter that talks about demolition. So we'll get into that detail a little bit. And then finally, our historic districts are treated with a completely different code section in a completely different chapter. So they're in our zoning chapter, or zoning code, rather than in the other parts of the municipal code. So we had to open that up. So in terms of the deterrence policies, I want to separate this discussion into what we do for deterrence, because that's what council directed us specifically to do. But then once these sections are opened, over the years for any aspect of our code, we realize either things have changed, code sections aren't clearly written, there are mistakes sometimes in the code, or the city's goals and policies may have shifted since that code section was written. So in general, the planning division takes the opportunity when we open up the code to look to see, are there other places that we might want to recommend that city council consider for changes? So it's not overstepping our mission, but it is, most of the changes we're proposing relate to these other things rather than the demolition deterrence. So it remains to be seen if council will accept those things, but we're presenting it all to Historic Preservation Commission tonight. In early March, we'll be going to the Planning Commission, which is a required body for review. So your review tonight is advisory to council. Planning Commission is a required body to review things for any ordinance change, any code changes. And then we'll be going to council as of now tentatively in early April. So in terms of the two sections that really relate to demolition deterrence, let me open my notes here. We basically identified 5 sections of Chapter 1520, which is the preservation chapter, that we needed to look at. We needed to open up the definition section so that we could add definitions for things that hadn't been defined. A term that we use all the time in these meetings and staff uses all the time is something like character defining feature. We had no definition for that. So what we've done is create definitions. For the most part, we're trying to go to other sources, to the National Park Service, for example, in this case, to find out what's the established definition that's used nationwide for this kind of feature, and then we're pulling that into our ordinance. We also needed to define what's a potential historic resource, because it's not just something that's in a survey. It's like I said, it's something we may never have seen. And how do we kind of say to a property owner, well, your property looks like it's a historic resource, and they're going to say, well, it's never been surveyed. How can you say that? We now have a kind of a laid out methodology for how we say that. So anything you see in all of these code changes that we're talking about, that talk about the Director of Community Development, that's basically from the current director through our current staff. It's a staff level kind of determination, with the director being kind of the figurehead authority for those changes. So all of those definitions are in there, and then for each of the 4 code sections that or for 3 of the 4, we've either added definition sections that were never there before, or we've kind of augmented them fairly dramatically. So we have lots of new definitions throughout this discussion. So I won't hit all of those individually, but hopefully you've got those. And we will note for the record that Commissioner Doom has arrived at 5:39 p.m.
In a nick of doom.
I won't say 40, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another aspect of, well, I just discussed the section that we've added for character defining features. That's a completely new section. Subsection 080 is about demolition clearance and permits required for demolition. What we wanted to do there is just clarify that we have a clearance process and that demolition permits are required. This was in the code before, and we'll talk about Chapter 1522 in a couple of minutes. That section needed serious, somewhat major revisions to kind of have it make sense and then tie into kind of what we're talking about tonight in terms of deterrence. So we brought our enforcement provisions into Title 1520. That's where the main enforcement language exists. And the other thing we've added is we kind of broke some sections apart. Previously, we had language that talked about demolition and major alterations in the same code section. It was convoluted, it was a mess, so we kind of just broke that apart. So we have the freedom when we're doing this to either delete sections, revise sections, add sections, so we have full freedom to work through things in that way. So that's what we've done for Title 1520, and I guess I'll pause so you guys can comment or question as we move forward, because it's going to get pretty cumbersome otherwise. So any thoughts on this section?
On the 1520?
1520 for the demolition deterrence
20,
aspects.
35, 80, 82, and 90, those specifically, right?
Yeah, those are the ones I called out that relate most specifically to the deterrence policies. Enforcement is the real key one. So if you look at enforcement in the actual code language and you turn, so that's Title 1520, which is attachment 2, I think, I hope.
Yes.
Okay. And if you turn to the section 15.20.090, that's the enforcement section, and that's where all of the bullet points we just looked at of the deterrence policies that City Council authorized us to move forward with, all of those are folded into this. So you'll see that anything in black is the code language we had before. So we did have enforcement provisions before, obviously. Everything that's underlined in red is new language that we're putting in. And then when you see anything that's strikeout with a line through it, and in this case colored blue, that's old language that we've deleted. And you'll see a different balance of these things as you move forward. But without going into detail here, even though this is the meat of what we're talking about, all of those bullet points we looked at are in this section. So,
But if we have comments, can we just go page by page?
of
or-
course, yeah.
Okay.
Although I will be talking, each of these sections I'm going to come back to
In
when
more
we talk
detail?
about the general things.
Okay.
It might be easier then
Tell me
because,
when.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
Because I only have one more section here, and that's a quick one
Okay.
for talking about demolition deterrent specifically. The historic preservation, the historic district chapter, oops, typo, sorry, didn't really need too much in terms of demolition deterrence, except we revised the last section, 060, and we included in there that the enforcement section of Title 1520 that we just looked at is incorporated into this.
Got it.
And this is the mind-numbing aspect of doing this, as you're moving through different code sections, trying to make sure you capture all of the parts and reference to the correct sections. So that's where, if you see anything, let me know. If anyone sees anything, let me know. And I should mention that I'm the primary author of these changes, but I've been working with Jillian Van Meiden and Yvette Nukian from City Attorney's Office, Eric Kraus, our Deputy Director, and Kristen Asp, one of our principal planners. So we're kind of the core team that's kind of looking at all of this stuff. And
You're not the only eyes.
I'm not the only eyes, yeah.
But Jay, I want to acknowledge right now, this is
Yeah.
an incredible amount of work.
Yeah.
And you guys have really
Here, here.
done a thorough job.
I won't tell you what time I was here till some nights, but
Yeah, I didn't.
The breadth of this is
Probably wasn't
incredible.
night anymore.
it was worse than any of the other ones I've ever complained about. So, yeah, so,
No,
Well,
thank you so much.
okay, well, let's see what happens at the end
Yes.
and then see where council takes
Yeah.
it. So 3025, really, that's the only change. So the way I've structured this is I wanted to highlight the demo deterrence with those slides, and then I was just going to walk through each of the 4 sections and highlight some of the things that come to mind as the kind of major changes, just to put it out for your review and for the public. And this is where I think we can page by page, section by section, questions, comments, and whatever else we have.
So I'm wondering if, since this is going to be probably a little more fluid discussion, should we open the public hearing now and let our speakers speak, or should we do that after you finish your
That's not a bad
presentation,
idea, so
or-
that their concerns can influence your
Right.
questions and thoughts here.
Okay, so with that, we'll open the public hearing, and we have one speaker, Steve Hunt.
Good evening. I have to make a change here because of the newly elected chair. So, good evening, Chair Vartanian
Hello.
and members of the Historic Preservation Commission. My name is Steve Hunt. I'm here as the president of the Glendale Historical Society. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed changes to the Glendale Municipal Code relating to historic preservation. Jay, you mentioned mind-numbing.
Yes.
I just see what we go through to try and get out a constant contact email, just invite somebody to a party. Mind-numbing is a good description of what you've been through, so
Yeah.
thank you.
All right.
We are extremely grateful to staff for executing such a thorough and thoughtful revision of the municipal code. This has obviously been an enormous amount of work. Your obligations are many, and we are happy with the results. Specifically, we very much appreciate the increased penalties for all types of illegal demolitions, which we expect will have a strong deterrence effect. We're also delighted to see protections against illegal demolitions and partial demolitions extended to potential as well as designated historic resources and buildings within pending as well as designated historic districts. We're also thrilled to see that the HPC will have design review authority in many more cases that involve historic resources. We believe this is a big step forward for preservation in Glendale, and we thank staff for their hard work on this. We do have a couple of questions. The staff report says that demolition permits can only be issued once a project is approved. But the language in Ordinance 1522-040B is that demolition will not be approved until all discretionary permits for the proposed project are approved. Does this mean that demolition can only be approved after building permits have been issued? We hope this is the case, as sometimes there can be a very long time between project approval and constructions, and sometimes approved projects simply do not get built, resulting in the unnecessary loss of a historic property. We're glad to see that it is proposed that additional parking requirements would be waived for a new use of historic resources or for an addition to a historic resource. Would it be possible to extend this parking exception to historic district contributors in cases where an original garage would need to be demolished? Would it also be possible to waive requirements that original driveways need not be replaced with pavers or other non-historic materials? These are obviously small quibbles. Overall, we are very enthusiastic about the proposed changes, and we believe will result in a better protections for possibly thousands of historic properties in Glendale. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing. Did we want to?
I can address one of those
Address-
fairly
yeah.
easily. The other one I'll try, and the other one I'm not sure. So in that order, the language in 1520.040 that Mr. Hunt referenced is subsection B that says demolition clearance application shall be processed concurrently with all other required discretionary applications and shall not be approved by the Director of Community Development until and unless all of those discretionary permits for the proposed project on the site are approved. The intention of that is we will not approve a demolition permit until the building permit is issued. The building permit becomes a discretionary permit because design review is built into that. So we can't, what we can't do is not issue a demolition permit. We can't make someone build after a building permit is issued. Building permits are good for 2 years, and we can't hold up a building permit once we clear the demolition. So there may be situations where that happens, but it would usually be something if a recession kicked in after the permit was issued. There's no financial incentive for most people to demolish something and then leave the site vacant. That's why we're treating that as a disincentive for the illegal demolitions. So the goal is that once the discretionary permits are approved, then we can approve the demolition permit, but not before. So I hope, is that clear? And we'll talk about this in Title 1522. We have previously had a procedure for clearing demolitions. That entire section of the code, frankly, was not very well done. It's kind of a mess, and that's why we've spent so much time focusing on that. What we've tried to do in that section and then bringing it into the other two sections that are relevant is make it clear that we will not clear a demolition until the time when either HPC approves a project for that site, or DRB approves a project for that site, or perhaps City Council approves a project for that site. And once we have that DRB approval, that means the project can go into plan check with building and safety. Once it goes through plan check, then the building permit is issued. And that's where there's just this potential gap that we have no control over, because we can't make someone build, up until 2 years, and then so it could happen that her permit's issued and no building is ever built on that site, but I don't see any way around that off the top of my head. And it's fairly normal. Many cities have a provision that no no new project or no demolition is approved until a new project is approved for that site. So what we're doing is bringing ourselves into conformance with that kind of standard practice in other cities. We even have some limited amounts of language in the current code that suggests that's what we do, but what we've done is clarify that pretty dramatically through this whole process. In terms of the parking exception, we didn't really revise that section. I think we clarified something in there. That was for Glendale Register properties, and the idea is that's really for a situation like the Masonic Temple, a building that was built in 1928 with no parking, and it's now an office building that would have required a lot of parking to meet that new use. And so we have that as an exemption, so you don't have to park the new use. And it's really related to the change of use. In a residential neighborhood, a historic district or otherwise, we're not changing use generally. And the city has reason to expect that parking occur on that site. So there could be some limited situations. Some houses have one-car garages. When you have a one-car garage, and if you want to build an addition to the property, and even if it's a small addition, you often have to upgrade that to a two-car garage, possibly even a three-car. In that situation, we do have ways that we could work. It could ultimately have to be a variance to allow the one-car garage to stay. And we can take that under consideration, and I can share that with my colleagues who are much more versed in the zoning code than I am. And I assume we have the statement in writing from TGHS? Ultimately, yeah, if you could share it with me by email, I'll bring that up with my colleagues and see if there's something there. But off the top of my head, again, that's not what our current exemption is designed for. And then in terms of driveways with pavers, again, I'll look at that. That's more of a design review issue, and I wouldn't want to prevent the commission from having the latitude to consider a different driveway treatment. In general, we expect people to have historic driveways appear close to what they were, especially for a Glendale Register property. We did have a recent situation in Ross Moyne where some pavers were added to the driveway, and if my memory serves, the commission accepted those, even though it wasn't the original concrete driveway. That project kind of went sideways from where we were when we talked about it, but so that one, again, we'll take into consideration once I have the letter from TGHS, but I think it was Ross Moyne.
I think we're trying to remember which one, maybe the one on Moncada.
It was Moncada, 1400. Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, doesn't matter. I think it was that one. So yeah, so we'll look at those two, and I think we're pretty covered in terms of by discretionary permit. That just means some cities there are two kinds of permitting in any city: discretionary and ministerial. If we were Los Angeles right now and someone said, I want to demolish a building, and LA looked at it and said, well, it's not on a survey, it's not designated, here's your permit, thank you. That's called a ministerial permit, where if you meet a certain set of criteria, you can't say no.
Is that similar to what ADUs are? Everything has to be ministerial with ADUs?
ADUs are kind of a hybrid because we have limited design review authority over those. But the state's goal was to avoid that.
Yeah.
But we've kind of worked it out somewhere in between. But in general, with the discretionary permit, we have the right to say no. And then that gives people the right to appeal, and we go through that whole process.
Got it.
So I think we're covered on that initial concern from TGHS.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the way I pictured doing the rest of this, without going crazy, is starting just numerically and with the easiest one, and going to Title 2 or Chapter 2.76, which is the Historic Preservation Commission chapter that talks about who you are, what your qualifications need to be, how we elect a chair and a vice chair. We only had to make some limited changes here, and these are not related to demo deterrence, but they relate to the direction that we got from City Council to expand the types of properties that we are looking at through all of these things. So I'm going to mention this here because it's pretty clear in Section M of subsection 100M on the second page. First, we include the Commission's review may be advisory in some cases or binding, so we want to cover both types of review. And we'll talk later about the limited situations where review is advisory. And then we wanted to expand the types of resources that we're looking at. So in the past, we only talked about designated historic resources, which means the 125 properties on the Glendale Register. Well, your authority extends well beyond that. This title was never updated even when we created historic districts. So this is the kind of thing that has just been sitting for years now without referencing districts. And, oh, actually, I'm sorry,
It was the pending part of it rather than the historic district itself, an approved one.
Yeah, I'm misreading this, right? Yeah, okay, so coming forward, we have pending districts, you're right. So we included several new things. Resources pending designation as a historic resource. We included that at the direction of the attorneys just to be thorough. That would be a property that we have a nomination for that's in play. We're considering it. It hasn't come to a vote either by HPC or by city, or more importantly, by city council. So it's just in that zone, just the way a pending historic district might be. It was important that we include potential historic resources, the ones that are either surveyed or that we've identified as a potentially historically important. We include protected interiors, which we included in our purview in an earlier round of changes to the code, so we just want to bring that in. Protected landscape features, the same thing. Those would be features that aren't protected trees the way the city protects oaks, bay laurels, and sycamores, but possibly could be identified in a historic, for a historic property. And then, as Commissioner Crognati mentioned, we extended the designated historic district to include pending historic districts. And that's a big change we'll talk about in a minute.
Can you just spend a minute talking about potential historic resources and how that ultimately would be, what would the mechanism be to define something as a potential historic resource?
That'll be jumping ahead to the next section we're talking about, so that's okay.
Okay.
So we'll just jump ahead. So any other questions on 2.76 or thoughts?
Nope.
Okay, so we'll move to title or section 1520, the historic preservation section. And to answer your question, Vice Chair Crognati, if you look on page 4, I think, yeah. I should have numbered these, I'm sorry.
Yes, that would have been nice.
I didn't realize it till I printed.
In the definition section, we have a definition for potential historic resource. That means a resource that is not a designated historic resource and is either identified by a status code of 1 through 5 in a survey or some other assessment commissioned by the city and prepared by a person meeting the Secretary of Standards professional qualifications or professional qualification standards, or is determined by the city to be a historic resource per resource code, blah, blah, blah. What that means is an example like the house that led to this discussion that had never been surveyed. I had never seen it before. We'd never heard from the community that there's this important craftsman house on Valley View. But as soon as the owner came in and said, hey, I'm looking into options here and I want to demolish this house so I can subdivide the lot, as soon as I saw that, I said, this house looks interesting. We need to pursue this further. Ultimately, it's not just my personal decision or the director's decision, but that slowed down the process. That allowed the Historical Society, in this case, the Historical Society came in with a survey form, a state survey form, prepared by someone who met the state preservation professional qualification standards, and that gave us kind of a legal leg to stand on under the state environmental law to say we believe this is a resource, we have this document suggesting it is, and we can't proceed with a demolition permit unless you prepare an environmental impact report. That process of how we would proceed with someone who was in good faith moving forward in that direction is laid out later on, so we'll get to that in a minute.
Thank you.
And that's where we're pinging back and forth through multiple sections here, so if you have a chance to read this in detail if you haven't already and have some thoughts, we still have time, plenty of time to work on that.
So Jay, some of the surveys that have been done, like I think the Craftsman survey was more like a windshield survey, right? So
Most of our
would
surveys
that
are windshield, yeah.
count, so does that come under the criteria of prepared by a person meeting the Secretary of the Interior's qualifications?
It does, but surveys have a shelf life of 5 years under CEQA. And so we have provisions in here that if someone came in to ask to demolish a property that we had from a previous survey, one of the first steps in the demolition clearance process, which we can look at more carefully, would be the director would tell that applicant, you need to hire a consultant to do a new assessment of that property. Then we would take that assessment in. Now what happens is that assessment may come back and say, well, we meet these standards and we don't think this is a historic property. We will then, I as the city's preservation professional can weigh in and say whether we believe that survey was conducted appropriately, whether the information is complete, whether there was enough information to make that determination. If I do believe that, yeah, it's a nice house, but they found out there wasn't anything significant about it, then we will move forward with the process and allow someone to move into the design review process. That's where, at some point, the Historical Society or some other member of the community might come back and say, wait a second, we disagree. Here's some information you didn't know about. The people didn't capture this, and then we go into the back and forth situation under CEQA that we do currently. But this does give the director and then staff the ability to request more information before we move forward with a decision. And the good thing here is that's going to apply to any potential resource. It's going to apply to, in a pending historic district, we don't know what's a contributor, what's a non-contributor at that point,
Right.
because we may not have had a survey. So we have provisions in here where the director can make a determination about what's a contributor and what's not a contributor, asking for more information as needed so that we can move forward with the best information possible. And the good thing is, even if that decision may be on the side of, yeah, we can move forward with this, we still have the public process where we might learn more from the community, so.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So going through 1520, I've highlighted just the sections that I thought had significant changes. There are so many changes that people may disagree with what's significant. One of the main things that we've done throughout, as I mentioned, is extend the range of properties. So that's consistent through everything, so we're not going to need to talk about that again. In section 1520.020, which is definitions, we had a fairly robust definition section from our last round, but we recognized that some of those definitions needed to be beefed up to talk about potential resources or whatever. And then we also added a number of new definitions. I'll highlight a couple of those. Strangely, we realized we needed to add a definition for building because our zoning code has a definition for building. Our preservation code never did. And the strange thing is, Title 1522, the demolition section, didn't even use the word building. It only used the word structure. A structure is not a building. A house is not a structure. A house is a building. So technically, for many years, we've had a section that if a good lawyer wanted to get on us about that, they could have said, well, you're talking about a building. You're saying you're protecting structures, but I'm talking about a building according to your own code. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to capture. I mentioned character defining features. We made it clear what a designated historic resource is. So we kind of broke things down where we identified what is a resource. And a resource is pretty much anything. Then there's a designated resource, then there's a potential historic resource, and then we also identified what a historic resource is. One of the subtle but fairly major changes we made is addition of a definition for historic integrity, which is the ability of a property to tell its story through the retention of its physical materials. And then we changed our designation criteria, the ones that you're familiar with, associated with a person and with an event, with architecture or with archaeology. We've added historic integrity to all of those designation criteria. That brings us into keeping with the National Register, the California Register, many cities, and it acknowledges that integrity is kind of there are parts of the definition of integrity that are more emotional than concrete, and we acknowledge that. And so, for example, we know that a property that's nominated for its architecture needs to have very high integrity, because we're talking about those very character-defining features that give it the meaning as a specimen of a style. Whereas a property associated with a person, we might have a little more latitude in terms of some of the changes. And the Commission's actually expressed this in a number of nominations that we've looked at, including the one for the radio TV host whose name is not coming to mind right now.
Mr. Morgan?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Ooh, no. No.
The one that had the organ in it?
No,
No, it didn't have an
that's Lauren Whitney. That one I know.
Oh, the one that was up on Cumberland?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
kind
on
of.
Cumberland.
Yeah.
Had the
After
garage
Cumberland.
built in front of it. And
I think the
Right,
reason
a
we,
whole different
I think that we
front.
don't remember.
where the Preservation Commission felt that changes were acceptable there, partly because it was significant with this person. And if my memory is correct, you didn't recommend it be designated for its architecture, but for its association. When we got to
Criteria
City
two.
Council, they disagreed and chose not to designate it. But anyway, so we've added historic integrity, which ultimately brings us in line with a lot of other jurisdictions.
So if that were to come back up, well, now that its criteria is less, do you think they would have a chance or no?
Well, it depends on who's sitting on City Council and what their decision
Okay.
interprets. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah,
But it would be a little bit easier.
Well, it could be, and I think you guys took into account that without it being written. So
No, I know.
what we're doing is just putting it in the law, so, or in the code. What else did we do? We identified potential resources we just discussed. We included tribal cultural resources because CEQA focuses a lot on that, and we never had any mention of it, so we want to include that. And then the other big change we made is to the definition of visible from the public right-of-way,
Like that.
which in the past we were using the definition that comes from the zoning code, which is visible from the public way in, I can't remember the exact language, but more or less in front of the property. Standing on the sidewalk, what can you see, what can't you see? What that doesn't do is account for visibility over someone's backyard, on a corner property especially. You might be able to see 2 or 3 properties into the lot. Someone might propose a large second-story addition on the back, and we wanted to be able to bring that back under the Commission's purview so that we have the ability to review those things at a higher level than we would if we used our strict old definition. So it's maybe worth reading a lot of those in more depth later on, but for now, I'll move on to Title 1520.030, which is renamed as authority. And basically, this is the kind of bureaucratic process of who reviews what.
Did we miss our chance to give comments on that section?
Absolutely not.
Oh,
I thought I paused.
oh, sorry.
Took a breath and went on.
I didn't catch the long enough pause.
Sorry. I guess I was hopeful.
Sorry, Jay.
I know, but that's what we're here for, so
He
why
hasn't
would I
had much
be
sleep.
hopeful about that?
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know how to say page number, but it would like be the second page, I guess, of 15.20.020. We're under major alteration.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if we should also add protected interior if public space. It only covers really exterior portion. But could they not do a major alteration that would take away a protected interior?
A definition.
Possibly. We sparingly used protected interior. For example, we didn't talk about demolition of protected interior as part of demolition because you don't just you don't need a demolition permit to demolish an interior space if you're not demolishing the whole building. So it didn't apply there. In this case, we really are looking at new construction that theoretically wouldn't necessarily, but that's a good point, and there's no reason I can think of to say no to doing that. So
Sorry,
I'm
what
gonna,
is the requested change?
to include protected interior under the under the
Protected
definition for
interior if
major
public-
alteration.
if Public space.
Just if public space.
Well,
Okay.
typically, they're protected, really, if it's only accessible to the public, like.
Yeah, we have a
theater,
definition
lobby,
for
or the-
protected
yeah.
interior
Yeah, it's
that's
in here.
it's customarily open to the public.
Yeah.
and that's something we added a few years ago in 2014, I think. And
But that's already, I mean, I don't mind adding the language, but it's already somewhat assumed in the definition of protected interior, no?
Well, not under major alteration. Now we're going through what you can do a major alteration only to the exterior.
Means alteration to any exterior portion of a designated
Yeah, I
historic
can
resource
picture-
or to any protected interior.
The end of it says protected interior, doesn't it? The end of that?
or to any protected interior.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Good one.
Yeah,
Thank
it's right
you.
there.
Yeah. It
Okay,
just wasn't
cool.
in red.
We're cool.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't, that's.
Oh, I pulled that out separately, so it's alteration to any portion, any exterior portion, or to any protected
Yeah.
interior.
Right.
Okay, perfect.
Because it didn't, the major alteration didn't apply directly to that.
Thank you.
In terms of, okay, good.
Okay, then under minor alteration, under letter C,
Mm-hmm,
that paragraph needs some capital letters to be consistent.
thank you, yeah. That was one of the
Other
fun things
sections.
doing this. The great thing is we capitalize them because it makes it easier for everyone to read. The company that takes our code and then publishes it decapitalizes everything. So the reason I had to go back and
Back and
recapitalize everything here to make it easy, and then they're gonna undo it as soon as they get their hands on
Oh,
it, so
geez.
whatever. But thank you. So. All right.
And on 15.20.030, under authority,
Uh-huh.
I was just wanted to question A, where it says the Director of Community Development shall consider and render decisions. Typically, you have always identified whether they were advisory decisions or binding decisions. Would this be?
No, these
one or
are
the other?
decisions,
Just
yeah.
plain decisions?
Yeah, decisions I
You
think
didn't want
legally
to-
means they're binding decisions.
Okay, because like, for instance, in B, you would say render binding decisions, or in other ones, it would always be binding decisions to
And B
differentiate.
of
That same
authority?
page. Like, under the Historic Preservation Commission shall conduct hearings and render binding decisions. I was curious if the Director of Community Development does not render binding decisions, but if not, they should be set as binding, so.
When we say decisions in general, it means binding. When we call it out, the reason it says binding and advisory is because we, and we'll talk about this more in depth, but in terms of potential resources that are identified in a survey, we didn't want to give the commission full binding authority over those, because those are property owners who may have absolutely no idea at this point that they have been identified in a survey. And it seemed a little draconian at this point. The city council did not direct us to notify every property owner that they're in a survey, and cities go back and forth on whether that's a wise idea or not a wise idea. And I can see both sides of that, and city council didn't give us direction back when they were approving the South Glendale Community Plan with the South Glendale survey. So I think that's why in that case, we said that where HPC's is binding versus where it's advisory.
Okay,
But in general, and I can ask the attorneys about that, if they're comfortable with just the word decision.
okay.
I have a question on that same page.
Mm-hmm.
But did you want to go over that page first? Because this is where you started to go over the page and we went back to make comments.
Well,
about
I
the
didn't
previous
have
section.
too much to say. The main thing I was going to mention here is that this is the section where we give the Director of Community Development the authority to identify character-defining features. That's based on the idea that in our more recent documentation of historic resources, whether it's a survey or a Glendale Register staff report, we're calling out character-defining features. We didn't do that even just a few years ago necessarily for Glendale Register. Most of our surveys do it to a greater or lesser extent. But when we go back just a few years, we don't have anything. So we don't have, for City Hall, we have no documentation of what's a character-defining feature. So we wanted to make sure that using the best preservation practices and ability to identify those features, that we could then have legal authority to kind of identify them.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about, on that page, number 3C?
Mm-hmm.
Design Review Board may, at the discretion of Director of Community Development, conduct public hearings, and render decisions on major alteration of potential historic resources subsequent to and informed by advisory design review conducted by the Historic Preservation Commission.
That may be a holdover from an earlier version. Let me look at that carefully.
Because I thought we changed that.
Yeah,
somewhere else, right? I can't remember where.
Oh, yeah, we'll have to go to the design review procedure. Let's see. If we jump ahead to, not there. Sorry for the dead air.
It's okay.
Yeah, if you jump ahead to 1520.082A, that section, we've kept major alterations and partial demolition of all of this laundry list of types of properties. And if you look down about halfway through the first paragraph of A, or through A, it says, in the case of a major alteration proposed for a potential historic resource, the Director of Community Development shall set the application for public hearing before the HPC, which shall provide advisory review. Based on the Commission's comments and recommendations, the Director of Community Development shall determine the appropriate binding design review authority, which will either be the Director or the Design Review Board. So the idea for that, that's what I kind of just mentioned, where these properties that are potential resources identified in a survey or that we think look like they might be a historic resource, we want to bring them to HPC. The owners may be not know what's going on with those. They may not know they've been identified in the survey or that staff has identified them as potentially historic. But before we do any further review on it, say someone's proposing an addition to a house that's in a survey, well, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes we can look at it and say, yeah, that addition meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we're very comfortable with it, and the property will still be a historic resource, still eligible for the Glendale Register at the end of that project. So we want to have the ability to say, yes, we can do that, because part of the goal, even though everything we're doing here is trying to protect historic resources, but we also have to protect residents' rights to move through our process without too much kind of burden on them. So in crafting it this way, we thought we're going to hear from the Preservation Commission, and you can think in terms of the property that is actually agendized tonight, so I'll jump ahead. The apartment building on North Columbus, where there was a proposal to enclose the front balconies with glass or with windows. And in that case, HPC's review was advisory, and had the owner said, I'm going to move, spoiler alert, had the owner decided to move forward with that project, we would have brought that to DRB.
With our comments.
With your comments recommending that not be done. And then we would have seen what DRB did, and then there would be an appeal process, and it would have just kind of moved through the way it's supposed to. So
what if that were a potential contributor to the Casa Verdugo Historic District, for instance?
So when we get to the Historic District chapter, we've covered that.
Okay.
So if we can wait,
Yes.
keep that in mind.
Okay.
And
It changes.
but it's a similar process.
This section is not pertaining, the one we're talking about right now is not pertaining to historic districts. This
Yes,
is just
historic
potential
districts do not
resources.
exist in
Right.
Got it.
Title,
Okay.
Chapter 1520. So
Thank you.
yeah, which is weird. Other cities tend to keep them all together, and for whatever reason, ours are not only in, they're in completely different chapters.
So in this particular section, our purview is not elevated to binding at this point, in this particular.
For a potential historic.
For potential ones.
For a designated historic resource, definitely binding.
But for the
Ultimately,
potential.
for designated historic districts, binding.
That's where the big major change is, what we're getting to later, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Okay, so any other thoughts on the authority section, 030?
No, thank you.
Okay, I've already kind of talked about 035, which is character defining features. So we talk about them, and then we also give the director the ability to identify them. I pulled out section 050, which is our criteria section, basically, that lays out the 5 criteria for designation. And in this section, we have added historic integrity to the first four criteria. So the building needs to be identified as associated with an important person and retain historic integrity. But the definition of integrity from the Park Service that we're using allows for that flexibility that we just talked about. So, criterion 5, which has been a source of great discussion back and forth between staff, the commission, and the Historical Society, was reworded here to be more clear. We are probably going to be changing this in our recommendation going forward to council, because we've always looked at criterion 5 as the what I've called the incentive criterion, and it was proposed at HPC and to council as an incentive to help people who own some of these older buildings that might not quite make the cut in terms of getting on the Glendale Register, but because we know our community cares a lot about especially craftsman and pre-craftsman properties, we wanted to extend the possibility of the Mills Act incentive to owners of a nice but not Glendale Register eligible craftsmen, say. And our original language was directed by the State Preservation Office to stay very simple. And ultimately, the intent of this was lost in the shuffle, and it was being used all the time. Well, this property meets criterion 5. I'd say, no, it doesn't. That's only intended for owners who want to bring their property forward for the Glendale Register to get on the Mills Act, because it doesn't meet 1 through 4. And not meeting 1 through 4 means under CEQA, you're not a historic resource. By including this here, it allows the potential for someone to make a finding that it is a historic resource under CEQA. And this is something we just came up with and haven't reviewed it with the city attorney yet, but we may move this concept into the incentive section. So we'll go back to the 4 criteria, which keeps us in line with National Register and California Register standards. We'll still have this, but what that would do is prevent it from being kind of misused and forcing CEQA issues where we don't think they should be forced. If that's clear. I wasn't even going to mention that, but here we are talking about it, and I kind of forgot that actually is kind of a bigger point. So if you have any thoughts on that, please share them if you want to let them percolate.
Well, something like 1420 Valley View, would it qualified under 5? Under this one? We
wouldn't have needed it to, because it qualified under 3 as architecture. Okay. This is really for some of the more humble bungalows that still reflect, they're still old. And it's the kind of thing where I say it's cute, but it's not historic. It tells us about early Glendale, but it's hard for us to make this determination. The reason 5 exists is because, I don't know if you recall, but when Jordan Gardens, the low-income for sale project came forward, there were 3 houses on the site that were kept and protected, and the owner wanted to bring those forward for the Glendale Register and the Mills Act to create an incentive for buyers to get the Mills Act. We were very happy about that and great. We created incentive 5 to allow that process, that potential to happen, so we could, because the properties had already been identified as not eligible for the Glendale Register, and I believe that they weren't. Ultimately, they made changes to 2 of the 3 houses. The commission was not happy about that and decided not to designate them at all, even though we had the criterion built just for that one. And since then, no one has used it. I want people to use it. I want it to be there. It might even be more prominent if it's an incentive rather than where it is now. And what this prevents is someone from saying, well, yeah, it doesn't meet 4, but it does meet 5, and therefore it meets one of your designation criteria. I'm not sure legally how that would play out, but we just want to avoid that. So
can I ask why the year 1925 was selected? Is that one of the things you're thinking of changing?
That's kind of when the Craftsman era was dying.
So this was really, it sounds like this was really a Craftsman.
It's Craftsman and pre-Craftsman. It kind of reflects some of our policies when we were just working with the Craftsman survey, and we didn't know so we had a lot of properties identified as 6L, but that's through a windshield survey. We had no idea if someone of significance had lived there or possibly an event of significance. So in recent years, we would ask people for those 6L properties to do a limited resource report, looking at who lived there, any events, anything of significance. No. In our South Glendale survey, they did do background research on the properties that were 6L or higher, and in pretty much all cases didn't find anything. There's still some conflict between the community and where we went with that. But I'm good with the direction that we went with the consultant, and I think the commission was in many ways, if not all. And so 25 comes from there also, when they had identified that as the cutoff.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Looking ahead 50 years from now, is it possible that structures built later than 1925, as they age, could sort of, and as neighborhoods change and evolve, that some properties that were built before or after 1925 could potentially be,
Sure.
that just because they're not a craftsman, but they are.
If in 2118 our minimal traditional properties are dwindling and threatened, and the community is like, oh, save the minimal traditional, we could do the same thing. So,
But what I'm getting at
but we
is
wouldn't do it now.
that's not something we're going to do now.
Yeah, because we have the 4 criteria for significance, and that serves us well. This is really just a way to, because of interest and concern in our community, we're addressing that concern today. And if we had any Victorians left that weren't designated, we'd be, doing it for those. And at this point, none of our subsequent types of buildings or styles of buildings are really threatened in any unusual way. But you're right that these are living, breathing documents, so they're going to change to meet the times.
So would I don't have one in mind. But would a 1923 Spanish revival be something that would be considered under criterion 5?
No,
Okay.
not because theoretic we would consider it as, does it meet any of the 4 or really the 3 criteria, 1, 2, or 3?
This one still has me slightly confused, but you're going to discuss it again when we get to incentives, or no?
No.
Okay,
This
we're
is a
done with it.
preview of something that we didn't make a change here.
Got it.
So far, this is the only recommended change of significance since this was drafted and distributed to everyone.
Okay.
But when we say city's early architectural heritage, we know what we're aiming at, but it's pretty open, right?
Well, except that's why we added 25.
But it's also not very.
But to his point, 1923 Spanish,
I mean, there's not many of them.
you wouldn't have
frankly,
many.
But
But you would hopefully meet under criterion 3
Yeah.
for architecture.
But if you didn't, because for some we're saying for some craftsmen, you're not going to meet any of the other criteria, but we want to protect,
Yeah, but
I'm
the
just sort of
span-
arguing the point.
Because that would open it up to every early flat-roofed Spanish that has a little doodad detail roof at the front, but is really kind of a modest example of what the aspirations and tastes of people were at that point. And the commission has every right to designate properties like that also. The commission has the purview to say, listen, we've been designating all these beautiful grand Spanish houses. We haven't really got many of the modest examples, the Ethel Streets or the Pelanconi houses. And you have the ability to make a determination that you think those are worthy of being included in the pantheon of Glendale Register properties.
I guess.
So that's what I'm getting at,
So-
is that's why we're leaving it kind of open. Otherwise, we would just say craftsman,
Except
right?
that
Well, we
except
want
that
to
he's saying that it is
include the
just-
pre-craftsmen also.
Well-
We have the 1907
Yeah,
kind of
that's true.
vernacular, steeply pitched roof bungalows that aren't quite craftsmen.
That bothers you, or?
I think I think the thing that's kind of bothering me, and I hate to belabor this a lot because it sounds like it's not something, anyway, is that it's in practice, specifically from what I'm hearing, for craftsman properties, but it doesn't say that. So someone could read this ordinance and think, well, I've got a 1923 house, I'm going to try and do this thing. And we're going to have to tell them, well, no, it's intended for craftsmen, but it doesn't actually say that.
Well, it's the same thing with someone coming in and saying, my house embodies the distinctive and exemplary characteristics of a style, and the commission can agree or disagree. So the ordinance language allows for that kind of discussion and flexibility. But the true intent of this, the reason this exists, is because City Council had heard from so many people and the Historical Society over time that our craftsman heritage is disappearing. And as much as I would say, I would love to protect every craftsman building in the city, you can't do that, and you shouldn't do that. But we wanted to give an owner the opportunity to come forward and say, hey, if I can benefit from the Mills Act, maybe that's enough to make me not turn this into a 3-unit property.
I guess
And-
it's the idea that there was a spirit of something behind this that isn't reflected in that.
Well, that's the problem. That's why this will be the 3rd or 4th revision of this section since the idea came up. The initial, if you read just the black, the resource,
It's all gone.
yeah, this got messed up. So the early version of this said the resource exemplifies the city's early architectural
Yeah.
heritage period, something like that. And that was way too broad. And then we went to council and we kind of talked about why we were adding this. The only reason we're talking about moving this is because this can be misused, but I don't think it precludes any of these properties from being protected with the original intent of this that both the commission and council approved back in the day. And I get that it's kind of broadly drawn.
It's still vague. I mean, it has the year 1925 in it, but it's just a few more words to say exactly what it said before. Exemplify the city's architecture.
Well, what I'll do, my thought is that becomes too specific, because if we start calling out a style, then we're like, okay, well, what do you call the 1898 steep-pitched vernacular folk? You know, the architectural guidebooks have all kinds of styles, some more accepted and some more fanciful. And I'd be hesitant to do it by style. I get the limitations here. But I'm going to note your concern, and we'll talk with the city attorney about whether we should consider adding style. Okay. Try to speed up a little, but we have 070, the incentive program.
I have something on 055,
Okay.
just quickly.
Mm-hmm.
This is talking about deletions from the Glendale Register.
Oh, right.
Did
okay.
we need to add one that would cover the situation of ownership change right after city council designates it, but the owner decides not to sign their?
No, because,
It's not a resource.
no, the owner doesn't design, that's a Mills Act contract that the owner
Only
might
concerned
not
about.
sign.
Okay.
But it's the minute that city council says you're on the Glendale Register, you're on the Glendale Register.
Okay.
And we wouldn't, if there's an ownership change in between, going up to that, we would either withdraw it and make sure the new owner wanted to move forward with it, so they would have the control.
With the Mills Act.
But I know which one you're talking
Yeah.
about, and that was a Mills Act issue, so.
Got it, thanks.
So that house, the one that she's talking about, is a historic resource?
It is, but it isn't.
Doesn't.
It isn't.
It is, but it shouldn't be
Right.
in its current condition. And, you know, it's not agendized, but soon you will be asked to go visit the site to look at something the owner has revealed and make a determination on whether you think you want to proceed or not, so.
More to come.
And then on that deletion, well, it's on 060.
Mm-hmm.
For, under the deletion, under number 2,
Okay.
2B, it was talking about that for 10 days, there's going to be prior to the hearing, there'll be notice, and will it be actually a sign mounted on 4x4? Like, you'll do that for deletion of a,
We decided to be consistent with all of our other policies.
Wow.
In the past, we haven't had anyone apply to delete anything
Yeah, we
since
were-
I've been here, but this is consistent. That's why this section looks so funny and is so much more detailed than a lot of
Yeah, I
what we're
was just
doing.
Yeah.
make
We just
sure
took
you-
the language from
you
the
meant to
zoning
do
code
that.
and brought it in here.
okay.
So it's basically whenever you see a sign where there's a project for an addition or something, and you see that big sign, we're going to do that for these houses, and that means everyone in the neighborhood's going to see it, hopefully,
For deletions.
for deletions.
And does the?
Several years ago, we made a determination that nominations don't have any impact on neighbors, and we used to have to go through this burdensome noticing process for all of our Glendale Register applications. So we took that to HPC and to council, and they got rid of the noticing requirement for designations, but we kept it for deletions because there are people in the community who would care about deletions.
And so for designation, city council requires a 4-5 council vote. For deletions, does it as well?
No, that provision is, it's kind of funny. We went to council and also to HPC 2016, I can't remember, not that, whenever it was. The last time we made major revisions to this title, brought to them the idea that if an owner, in general, if an owner objects to a nomination, we can't bring it forward. The owner has to consent to a designation. We presented to council the idea, like, what if there's this building that's so important to everyone that even you guys, four out of five of you, think that this should be protected? We gave council the ability to do that.
Super.
That did not, several code sections from that round of changes did not make it into the official printed version of the code through going to the company that does that. So some of those look like they're new here, even though they're already approved, but we have to kind of show them
Okay.
as new.
Thank you.
So
You mean they just got missed?
I don't know what happened. They were, you go back to the documents reviewed by council that were part of the resolution, and they're there, and then they're not there. And there's actually one other section of this that I'm going to have to recolor to reflect that, but we were still working with the attorneys on that. So, yeah, but that's kind of a done deal already.
Yeah.
And for deletion, it wouldn't apply. We wouldn't want council through a 4/5 vote to be able to take things off the register. Ideally, once you're on the register, you're there unless this set of circumstances occurs. So,
I remember the discussions about that. I think it was
I remember one of our
2012 maybe, or
council members' votes on that was very amusing. So, the Russian language was invoked.
Oh, my.
Oh, dear.
Yet,
Yes.
creeping socialism. Okay, any other questions there?
No.
What section are we on now?
I'm checking.
70?
We're
Incentives?
still in
I think
1520.
so.
We have the incentives. We have section 080, which is the demolition clearance. The clearance and permit are required for demolition of designated resources, potential resources, and protected interiors. And so we renamed that section to make it more clear, and we separated the discussion of major alterations, which used to be mixed in with that, so.
So I just had a question on that one. In A, it doesn't indicate CEQA. Not until C does it talk about a review required by CEQA. However, in the next section, letter A has CEQA kind of right up front. And I was wondering, is that intentional or?
I don't know.
Which section? Oh, the 2082?
2080 versus 2082, yeah. correct.
Partial demolition resource of this.
Like, to me, as I read it, I was thinking, well, why isn't it right up front? You kind of have to get all the way to C, and then it's kind of like.
It's because 080 is just, is general.
Okay.
And then 082 is specific to major alterations or partial demolitions.
The first one's complete demolition.
Yeah, and I think it's just the structure of those sections is a little different. As long as CEQA is discussed in that section, it's going to apply. So if we're talking about demolition, CEQA applies based on C. So it's incorporated through inclusion there. A lot of these sections I don't think necessarily are direct corollaries from letter to letter in different sections. I could look at that more carefully.
That's fine. I mean, it's there. It just seemed like it was a little hidden, so I was just.
No, we're not trying to hide it. Yeah, I think city attorney will probably say it's fine because it's there.
Okay.
And the sections are structured differently. Okay, in terms of, okay, so that's the last section that I had any specific notes about. A lot of the other things are just clearing up language and other things. And then we already talked about 090, which is the enforcement section.
Okay, just one comment on 084, B1, where it says replacement of doors within existing openings. Does the word doors include the meaning of garage doors?
It does, but that's not a bad idea to clarify that. I think we did that somewhere else and just didn't make it back.
And then, yeah, so also though, if someone wanted to fill in a window Is that something that requires a permit? They wanted to eliminate a window?
Limited amounts of stucco. I don't know what the threshold for stucco permits might be might be a bigger job than just a window infill. But generally, I believe that's part of, we almost always see those proposals, and we allow them sometimes. So, especially more likely in a district than for Glendale Register property. But generally, because there's structural work going on with that,
Right.
sometimes, because usually people are doing it, let me think how. Yeah, there's not always structural work, but there is stucco work. Permits are required for stucco work. So what I could do is check what the threshold is for a stucco permit, because there are safety issues with stucco and waterproofing issues with stucco that the building department wants to have
What if a house has
oversight over.
siding or something?
So let me add, so I'll check on what the threshold for a permit for that is.
Okay. So I guess if it was a wood-clad house, 3 would cover that, because it's installation of wood cladding.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. But
And when
you're
we say
saying-
wall cladding, which includes stucco, which wood, possibly other stone, other things,
Okay.
brick. Okay. 086 didn't really change. 090 is the big change. And then everything else is just cleanups. Any thoughts there?
No.
Cool. Okay, the next section we'll look at is Chapter 1522 for demolition permits. So I mentioned that this section was kind of a mess. It had policies built into it that none of us even knew that we had or even were desirable. And so we've, fairly extensively revised this section, still with the intent of making it clear that you can't demolish something without a permit. You need a permit, and we have a clearance process. We've had a clearance process since this section was created, which is before my time, so it could be 13, 14, 15 years ago. The 2 big global changes we made was the way this was written before, it applied to buildings 30 years and over. As I was thinking about that, I realized the Rice House up on Rimcrest is built in 1993 and is currently less than 30 years old. That's protected because it's on the Glendale Register, but we may have some rare property that is of such significance that it's less than 30 years old, and we wouldn't want to lose oversight over it. When we thought about it, we also we factored in consideration of staff time. This isn't going to burden us in any tremendous way. Most 30-year-old buildings aren't being demolished or proposed for demolition. So we got rid of the 30-year requirement, which means our clearance process now applies to everyone. Before you get a demo permit, you're cleared. If the building was built 10 years ago and I look at it and I say, there's nothing going on there today, and if the future tells me I'm wrong, well, I won't be there either, so, but whatever. So we felt pretty comfortable just eliminating the 30-year requirement. This section also makes clear what we talked about earlier, that the clearance is required before any design review approvals are granted. So the way it works now wasn't clear here, but say a property goes to the design review board and we've determined it's not a historic resource. We've looked at it, it's been publicly noticed, the Historical Society, no one else has come forward saying it's a historic resource. We still are clearing that demolition through the design review board process. So we have a clearance form that we use, and after the DRB approves the new project, that's when the clearance is approved. They still don't have their demolition permit, but the clearance is approved, and you can't get a demolition permit before the clearance is approved. So we think we've kind of given us enough safeguards here to move forward without having things slip through the cracks. And now that I've said that, well, watch what happens. So a lot of the changes here are just kind of sort of legal-ish things that we had to add. We did significantly change the section 025 about authority. And what we wanted to do is, now that we've identified all these different property types, whether designated historic, potential district contributor, district non-contributor, whatever, we kind of pulled it out so it's pretty clear who has say over what. So HPC shall be the final review authority for the demolition clearance application and any required environmental review pursuant to CEQA and all other discretionary applications, meaning a design review application for what comes afterward. For the following property types: designated resource, potential resource, contributor, or non-contributor in a district. DRB is the final review authority if there is no historic resource identified on the site and design review board approval is required, which is Title 3047, different than what we look at. Director of Community Development is the final review authority for properties that aren't historic and don't need to go to DRB, meaning they can either be exempted over the counter or that they can go through the process that we started a few years ago called administrative design review. So this just really clarifies what this section intended to do originally. Actually, this is a completely new section, I forgot. So we wanted up front to say who's responsible for what. Definitions, pretty much the same issues that we've talked about previously in terms of adding new things. Each definition section is different depending on what we're talking about, so some definitions don't appear in each section. Section 040 kind of says up front, as a prerequisite to obtaining a demolition permit, an applicant must submit a demolition clearance application. That wasn't as clear previously. And demolition clearance applications shall be processed concurrently with all other discretionary applications. So we can move someone forward in the design review process, but we're not going to, the demolition clearance isn't complete until we get a determination. And what this does, as I mentioned before, is it allows, in some cases, an owner of a registered property or contributor in a historic district may come forward and ask for demolition, as we experienced on another property on Valley View a few years ago. Yeah. And so we're trying to capture all of these possibilities. I changed, oops, there's a typo in here about procedure. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong section. So demolition clearance, and then the other big changes here are kind of going from that authority section, which just says, pointing the finger, okay, you're this kind of property, this is who reviews you. And then we go into great detail, depending on who the review authority is, in terms of how that process works. And that's what we talked about a while ago, where if a potential resource comes up that's identified by staff rather than through a survey, or it's on an old survey and we need that to be updated, the Director of Community Development, if you go to 070, the director has the ability to require the property owner to give us further documentation indicating whether or not the property is a historic resource. Based on the results of that, then we decide how to move forward with the process, whether it comes to HPC, whether we can move forward with a DRB approval. So this section took a lot of work, and to the best of my knowledge, is pretty clear. Mm-hmm. And hopefully you guys, if you haven't had a chance to look at it in depth, like I said, we're
I'd like that, especially that you can direct them to use a consultant chosen by.
Yeah, and that's something that was advocated strongly by the Historical Society. City
Yes.
Council accepted that for EIRs. Mm-hmm. And the language there is going to change a little. That was my language. Eric Krause actually has been in charge of the other language change, so he's going to give me language to plug in here before we get to the City Council. Yeah, so that is good. And I think, yeah, that was it for that section. So those three sections are pretty dense, but hopefully clear. And a lot of this is just trying really hard, even though the language gets very repetitive, to kind of make it, hard for someone to find their way through it.
You guys have done an incredible amount of work.
But we also included in that 070 Director of Community Development, we made clear In the past, we've treated garages somewhat differently than the primary building on the site, but we don't want to lose sight that garages can be significant parts of a contributor to a district or to a Glendale Register property. So we kind of beef that section up to make it more clear. And then that includes pool houses, anything that we call an accessory building. And I forgot to mention, in preservation, whenever you guys are looking at a DPR form, there's a section that says what type of property is it. And in preservation, you can be a building, structure, object, site, or district. There's kind of a string of things. We've brought it down to building, structure, object. Object meaning a fountain, a flagpole, who knows what, but it's something that doesn't have a foundation, it doesn't have a roof, it doesn't have the things that are defining features of a building or a structure. And that brings us into conformance with kind of federal standards, so, or federal language, I guess. So any other questions on this one?
No.
That means we're almost done. So 3025 is the historic district ordinance. Again, we added, this section never had any definitions at all. So you can see everything here is in red, and we basically just cut and pasted a lot of the other definitions, but then we added definitions for what's a contributor, what's a non-contributor, what's a pending historic district, what's a historic district. And then we also applied the visibility that I mentioned before. We extend visibility to a radius rather than a linear looking from the front kind of visibility window. In terms of section 030, we didn't make a ton of changes here, but because of what's going on in Cumberland Heights right now, where we're going through the South Cumberland Heights historic districting process, kind of, and we are. I realize, historic districts may at some point want to expand, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel and ask for a whole new report to be done. We might be able to just specifically focus on that area, and we're even doing that in South Cumberland Heights, where we're looking at 7 properties that were never identified as part of Cumberland Heights in 2004, so we're kind of edging into an expansion there. But in the letter from the Casa Verdugo district, they kind of said that we don't explain how that's going to work. Well, partly because we have to figure that out when it happens. And we don't have to identify every procedure in our ordinances. Some people think that we already have too much identification of you do this, then you do this, and then you have this kind of meeting. In terms of districts, we have a lot of procedure in here that isn't required in an ordinance, but we didn't want to take it out because it's already there and it does make things pretty clear. What we wanted to do here was just let City Council know that this is something that would save time for staff, save time for applicants in situations where you can expand a district. What we didn't want to do is have a process for contracting a district, because the idea of districts is we're not going to let it be the whim of the time.
Right.
But there are procedures in the city charter to allow for people to petition to change zoning issues, just like we have an opposition petition during the designation process. Once something's designated, if, say, our process fell apart and it was a nightmare of regulation or ineptitude or whatever, and people were like, whoa, this isn't what we were expecting, through city charter provisions, you could kind of come back and revisit things, but we didn't want to have that either, So that was the main change of that section, just kind of using the word expansion. In 040, we kind of made some, that's where we kind of make clear that pending districts are now under the purview of HPC rather than advisory under HPC. When we did that, that was based on the city attorney read the existing language and said, well, I think we can give HPC anything advisory, so we may as well do that. We wanted to codify it and make it clear. So hopefully council's okay with that. Then in terms of major and minor alterations, we didn't have that language in this section before. So we basically just took the language from 1520, talking about Glendale Register properties, brought the same thresholds and same concerns forward, and I will add the issue about window infill and garage doors, so I don't lose track of that. And then tweak the language just to talk about contributors and non-contributors, basically. Same thing, routine repair and maintenance we didn't have, so now we have that, which basically brings all of our design review thresholds and the finger pointing of who gets to review what comes into both of these ordinance sections. And then we kind of revised significantly 060, which was the section that talked about demolition inside historic districts. We pretty much struck all of the previous language and added new language that kind of conforms with everything we've been talking about, including invoking that enforcement section of 1520. So hopefully that makes things more clear there.
Look at that.
And that's everything that I've got for that section.
Yeah.
And you too?
Great work.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you
so
for
much.
input. I have some notes, but not too many, so that's really
great.
helpful.
You did
That means we did a decent job, and it means you didn't read it, or you love it, so.
did read it.
No, we did read it,
No, I
I
know.
think.
Doesn't mean we understood it, Paul. But thank you for clarifying all those questions.
Yeah.
Okay, and this gives me a good sense of what I need to do for the planning commission hearing, which is get this nailed on slides and a lot more, a lot more concise than what I did here. But
But this was good exercise, though, I
yeah,
think.
no, I appreciate your insight. So
Thank you. So I think now we can, if you're ready, move on to 9B, which is review of the 2017-2018 Certified Local Government Report.
And this is our annual ritual, looking at not the past year, but the past October 1st through September 30th, which is the year that our State Preservation Office uses. A lot of this is pretty much copied forward from previous years. We do update the properties that have been designated, properties that have been put on the National or California Register. We talk about our design review protocols. That's pretty much boilerplate from previous years. We update commission membership we do have page numbers on page 5. We update that as needed. We do talk about professional qualifications and any changes that anyone has there. You can talk about now or email me, and I can, put those in there. We have your attendance at all of our meetings, which also shows them how often we meet per year. CLGs were required to meet 4 times a year to maintain our status as a certified local government. I should say this CLG means certified local government, which is a state program through the State Preservation Office to ensure that cities that do have preservation programs are kind of in line with each other. Not that we all can't do things differently, but they want us to meet certain baseline standards, have a seated commission, have, even having professional staff isn't a requirement, but here I am, so we got that.
Thankfully.
The place I know that I fell down on was keeping track of your trainings, and I appreciate that you guys are, without any coaxing from me, continuing to talk about trainings. Commissioner Shire identified a problem, which is our membership with the California Preservation Foundation lapsed. I didn't even know about that. We had some internal changes here. I should have been paying attention, but it's been lapsed for a while. So we are going to re-up, and that does give you access to free webinars, possible conferences, and then some of their day-long workshops. We get a few of those free, and then after that we get a discount on the price. So I'll be taking care of that in the next, next week. So any other trainings? Commissioner Shire gave me one training that didn't make it on the list that we sent up. Did anyone have anything? And then I also wasn't on it's a different page when we talk about education. I know that several of you have participated in TGHS events, the Restoration Expo or the house tour. You don't have to tell me now, but if you could just email me, what I'm going to do is revise this and send it back up to
So it
Sacramento.
hasn't gone in yet. Sometimes
It
we
went
look at
in.
it.
No, the deadline was Friday last week, so I already sent it in. They sent me confirmation today, but I told her that we might have some limited changes, so we're cool if we do that.
What page is that, the one you just mentioned?
9.
7 and 9.
Okay. So do you, the Restoration Expo, you have it in there, so we don't need to tell you that.
Well, no, well,
wants to
in the
know.
past, I've identified, it looks
Who it
nice when
was.
I can say all 5
I see.
commissioners went,
I
or
see.
only 1, or whatever.
We did.
Got
Yeah,
it.
so just
We
let
were
me,
there.
I remembered that some of you had done it, but I wasn't sure, so keep me posted. We skip page 10, we skip page 11, don't skip page 12. That's where we just update the number of properties that got designated during that period, so it doesn't reflect what I think of as our calendar year, and next month when we do our annual wrap-up, we'll talk about calendar year. But that's the way that goes.
So these are ones that that voted on and approved by council, right? Within that time period?
Once council approves it, and then for Mills Acts when they get recorded, so.
Oh, and they recorded.
And we only record Mills Acts once a year, so generally, however many we got for that year can be different than the number that we approved during that year, so it's
Okay.
just kind of funky.
It is.
The biggest part of this is where we talk about how did we fulfill our goals from last year and what our new goals are for this year. And this is where I always feel a sense of professional shame. That a lot of things that we say we are going to do and we want to do, and we're all optimistic when I write this one year, and wow, a whole year passes and we still didn't do it. I do carry them forward. I honestly acknowledge that, some things might be on the back burner for a while, and that, they've never expressed they read these things and sometimes come back and ask questions or tell me, well, that's not ideal. Especially in the past when not you guys, but when the commission in general, we never prioritized trainings. And they were very specific about doing more trainings, and that's a few years ago when we did the Secretary of the Interior Standards training here. That was kind of a response to SHPO telling us, you guys better do some more on that. Since then, last year we were amazing because everyone went to the CPF conference, which was in Pasadena, and there were a lot of other things. This year may not be so good. I would love if, in the future, if
This
the
coming year or
commissioner.
this year in the report?
What's that?
This year in the report or this coming year is not going to be?
This report.
This report. It's not as good as the previous report. Next year's report will be amazing, I'm sure. But at this point, I'll just put it out there that, and I see positive steps where the commissioners themselves are kind of getting the emails, getting yourselves on mailing lists, and kind of taking action, because I haven't been able to just forward every email and give you the little reminders. I'll try to do that more, but if you guys also see things that you want to participate in, and as we noticed, sometimes those can be covered for free, sometimes your expenses can be reduced with the member rate. And I do try to let you know when I know things are down here. A lot of the workshops are in Sacramento or San Francisco or whatever, so. Although we had a traveler go to San Francisco.
I traveled to San Francisco.
The CPF conference this coming year in May, which I'm going to be out of town for, so I don't get to go, but it's in Palm Springs
Oh, nice.
in May. Nice. So,
Do I see a
Hopefully the
potential-
roads will be reopened.
the what?
The roads
Oh, the roads
from the rains.
Oh, is it in that?
today?
They had their wettest
Oh.
day since 1942, and the main road in apparently
wow.
got washed out.
Oh, the 111 got washed out?
Yeah.
Wow,
Is there a typo on page 14 under D?
maybe. Likely.
Our 2017/17 goals are discussed individually. Should we do that?
Oh, you nitpicker, you.
Well, just,
Yes. Thank you. So this section, what are our most critical preservation planning issues? We want to get working on our East and West community plans, which hopefully will be accompanied by an East and West Glendale historic survey, which will be amazing if we get that. Then we'll have all of Glendale surveyed except for North Glendale, starting Spar Heights and above. So, which would then be the next goal. I also threw in there this demolition deterrence thing. because I wanted them to be familiar with the fact that we're doing that, because before, a requirement of CLG status is that before council acts on everything we just were talking about, I'm supposed to send SHPO all of the ordinance revisions.
Wow.
And theoretically, they look at those. So my plan is, after we go to planning, we have about a month between planning and council. I'm going to send it up to SHPO then, so I wanted them to just get a heads up on that.
Hopefully they'll go rah, rah, rah. Jeez.
I can't imagine that they're not going to, but,
Gosh,
you know.
all that work.
Did you say you had a date for planning or not yet?
March 6th, I think.
March 6th.
Yeah, and then council, we have a tentative for later in April, I can't remember. They ask what our single greatest accomplishment is. I'm still pretty excited that we have a public-facing portal that allows people to see if properties are historic through inputting any address. So that still, next year I'll probably come up with something different, but I wanted them to know that that's pretty big. And then the South Glendale survey isn't technically finished. We haven't gotten all of the DPR forms from the consultant, even though City Council kind of sort of approved it when they looked at it and moved us forward. The DS, just so you know, the whole South Glendale community plan is kind of on hold right now because a lawsuit was filed, and it's still in court. We don't think it's a serious lawsuit that's going to hold anything up. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but there it is. Beep. But yeah, it is a serious lawsuit, and the city's taking it seriously, of course. We're not sure that it's actually going to lead to any
It has merit.
significant changes. So, and then Section D is where we talk about how we met our goals. The survey is, for all intents and purposes, complete, so that's exciting. South Glendale Community Plan is complete, except for this issue, and then City Council also had some concerns about some density issues that don't relate to preservation, really. So we completed the community plan. We've debuted the property portal. We have not finalized the historic district brochure, which is just as close as it's been to being finalized since last year when I told, like 2 years ago when I told you. The thing we haven't added, part of the thing that needs to go in there is that now we potentially can offer the Mills Act to contributors in districts, and that wasn't built into this thing, so it's pretty tight. We're trying to keep this as a trifold brochure that's gonna get mailed out, so we may have to edit some things judiciously to allow space for that, and maybe some other things, so. But that's definitely gonna get worked on. The Mills Act issues that I mentioned earlier, we need to just sit down with the city attorney's office and figure out, can we do this retroactively, which is my strong recommendation that we do it so that all Mills Act properties are considered in the same way. And then I ended with, the little poke at the commission and the praise for Arlene, that we're still moving forward on our city-generated designations. And there's still a few more out there if you guys are curious and interested, so.
Maybe we could get an updated list at one of our meetings?
Sure.
I think we've lost track.
I didn't know there was a list. I thought we were supposed to come up with it.
No, we have a list that we've already vetted with all this because some city departments said no.
Yes.
And so although there's one that they said no to pending work, that work is done, so we might be able to bring that one back. Add to agenda the commissioner nominations. And then we kind of end with goals. I put together, some of those goals are the same goals we've had because they're just moving forward. We have not entered all of our data into the permit tracking system, which feeds into the property portal from the South Glendale community plan, from the South Glendale survey, which is hundreds of properties. I'm waiting for this final from the consultant to make sure they were finding a few things that needed to be fixed, plus we don't have the DPR forms, which we attach, so through that system, anyone going to an address can pull up the whole DPR form for the property. So I'm kind of waiting for all of that to be here. We want to begin the East and West Glendale plans. The demo deterrence I threw in there because it is part of this reporting year. We want to finalize the brochure. We want to deal with the Mills Act issues that we just talked about. Continue the HPC-driven initiative to designate properties. And then one thing that we haven't mentioned before is that it's a requirement that all Glendale Register property designations be recorded with the county. We record all of our Mills Act contracts, but we haven't recorded the designations since I've been here, and I don't believe they've ever been recorded. So we may have to do this mass recording of the 125 properties that are listed. The question then will be, there's been talk about how can we put into the public record associated with each property that it's in a historic district. So that would be a much bigger process. And I think stretch goal, I said, do the same for historic district properties. So that's definitely something we need to do. Right now, we're just relying on realtors doing due diligence, people hearing from neighbors, people seeing a historic district sign, getting the district brochure mailed to them in the future, whatever it's going to be. But there are still too many people who say, oh, I didn't know I was in the district. So the goal will be to make that
So that it would show up
hard
in
for someone to
title
say
and all that.
they didn't know.
Yeah, got it.
And that's it.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
About the east-west plan?
Uh-huh.
What is the dividing line?
Brand.
Both sides of Brand, will they be in one side, or is it one side is one?
No, and that's been a subject of a lot of discussion, and I think we were going to put the west. We want both sides of Brand to be in one or
section.
the other.
Okay, good.
Off the top of my head, I think we may have erred on the not erred. I think we may have chosen to put both sides of Brand on the east side, because that's where there's been kind of issues back and forth in the community. And we have higher density development on the east side of Brand, so some of those issues are a little reduced there.
Okay.
But that's not decided yet, so. But Brand will definitely be the boundary.
And then, do we have any idea which plan we're going to be looking at first, or is this all still
It's going to be
in the
one.
ether?
We're doing
one
them
all.
together as we envision now. Originally, it was going to be two separate efforts. The housing stock and the neighborhoods are very similar from east to west. We have the hillsides, which are similar from east to west. We also have the flattish land, which are similar. We have much less commercial than we had in South Glendale. So we figure there's going to be some, what's it called, when things get more efficient, economies of scale, where we can kind of do these
How far east does it
together.
go? How far east are we going?
To the city boundary.
Yeah.
The rest of the city.
But
And
then
the
all the way
North
north too?
Glendale plan starts at the very base of Spar Heights,
Ah.
where the business district starts at
Okay.
Carolina and
So Montecito Park, is that
Shriners.
already part of the north?
no, Montecito Park will be looked at with the Verdugo.
Yes.
I think, is it part of North? I think
don't
it's going to be considered with Verdugo Woodlands. That'll
Yeah.
be the northern boundary, then everything stretching to Pasadena, and then everything from the top of the Verdugos south to the division of South Glendale, which is the 134,
Right.
That's all east.
No.
and
Yes.
west,
that-
so.
Yeah.
It's west from Burbank. It's
Oh, got it.
Burbank to Pasadena, 134 to the ridge of the Verdugos, and then Verdugo Woodlands and Montecito Park and the College Hills and those neighborhoods.
That's all part of
Part of east.
east. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
And Rossmore.
got it.
Right.
Chevy
Thanks.
Chase.
Yeah.
That's huge. East is huge.
Yeah, it's
Well,
huge.
Horse-
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move on to item number 10, Planning Division updates and informational briefings. 10A is update on proposed balcony enclosures at 107 North Columbus.
And I've already spoiled this one for you. I just want you to know that I brought this up. I'm going to try in the future, when you've heard something and then you don't know what happened, to bring it back so that we can just let everyone know publicly what the outcome of HPC's discussion was. Undoubtedly, there will be times when I forget or something slips, and that's when you can ask me what happened and whether, sometimes I can just quickly say, and if we need to agendize it, we'll agendize it for the next hearing. But so that's a goal, to kind of keep these posted. So the owner is not infilling the 3 existing opening balconies. They're keeping the one that already has been infilled. They're doing a bunch of other work on the property, very respectful of the historic character, putting air conditioning units on the roof. There's a long balcony that stretches across the back of the building. They're putting some privacy dividers between units back there that are pulled away from the walls, and kind of like when you go to a hotel that has a divider between balconies, but there's still some airspace. And then they're also raising railing height. So the other thing that's happening at the front here, these from the floor here to the top of this railing is low, and the owner had some concern about safety there. So there's going to be a very simple railing with a minimal number of vertical supports crossing, just spanning each of these openings on both sides, and then also at the back balcony, which has a very not flimsy, but a very thin kind of boarded bead wood railing. They're going to put a new metal railing anchored to the floor and to the columns kind of behind that. So from the street or from the alley, we're only going to see the top of that, similar to what's going to happen at the front. So the owner was very, she was disappointed that she didn't get to do what she wanted, but it wasn't a big decision for her to decide to just move forward without. So I think this shows how our process can be very informational for owners, and also clearly lays out what the process is, and whether they decide, hey, the commission was right, or I don't want to deal with the hassle, we still are getting probably a better preservation outcome here than we might have. The RFP for historic districts, item 10B, I'm sorry.
I think I need to read it in, right?
Yeah.
So moving on to item 10B, update on RFP for proposed South Cumberland Heights and Casa Verdugo historic districts.
So the RFP's been finished on my end for quite a while now. It has been with the city attorney for a while and through a series of different things going on there. It just hasn't been finished. So I talked to the person who's reviewing it, and it should be reviewed by the end of next week. And then once I get that back, assuming everything's more or less okay, I'll make any revisions that are required. I have to rejuggle the timeline to figure out, when do we release it? When do we expect responses back? There's a whole series of events. You release it, you have a period where people can ask questions, and then we have a period where we have to respond to all of those questions and distribute them to all of the potential bidders. And then we have a deadline for the submittal of the RFPs. Then we give ourselves time to review all the RFPs, and then we have time to go to council with our recommendation. So it's still multiple months in that process. And I had that timeline when I finished it a while ago. And I think in December now, I can't remember exactly. And so I just have to move that forward in time, make any changes, get someone to help me mail it out to everyone, and then we just wait. So
you mentioned making the recommendation to council on which one to
we go through we get a stack of RFPs. Usually 3 of us, maybe 4, take the job of reviewing all of those. We create a scorecard so that we're looking at everyone kind of on a consistent basis and assign points for various things we're looking for. We come up with a point total, and theoretically staff's choice is going to be the one that gets the highest points. If there's a tie, we'll acknowledge that. We make a recommendation to council. Council still has the ability to choose
pick whatever they want.
Someone. We give them 3 generally. We pick the top 3 with a recommendation for one of those 3. And
that doesn't. We aren't involved in any of the. We're not involved at an advisory level on that, right?
You don't want to be.
Okay.
No, yeah, that's just on our end. And then once we select, you will be involved because we're gonna. We have to go to council then and ask for money. Money's not built in for historic districts, so we go to council saying we've chosen this bidder, and then we get authorization for the funding, and then we hire the consultant, which is another process going through the contract development and signing, and then they're free. Then they start their work, and then some period of time later we get it back, and then we come back to the commission for review of that document, and then based on that, you can authorize the second petition for the neighborhood to go forward,
Great. We'll have to call Sean back.
right?
I don't know.
He'll definitely not be.
So do we have designated staff other than yourself right now, or?
Oh, no, no. But
It's
No interns?
no, we haven't hired an intern, but we do have staff who kind of has worked on preservation issues in the past. It's kind of a planning exercise also, so we look at, we bring in our best people to look at this. So,
Oh, you guys are spread pretty thin, so.
yeah.
Okay, I think unless anybody has any comments. Thank you very much, Jay.
Yes.
That was a.
Sure.
Thank you for all your
Exhaustive work.
Yes.
That's
Yeah, I was
Sleepless
so
nights.
exhausted talking, I took no notes. So we'll see how this goes. So.
That's a first. So I think with that, we'll adjourn in memory of Ms.
Keith Palmer.
Keith Palmer. Okay, thank
Very
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, we adjourn.